very full 2 days, but I'm going to, for all of the viewers, whether you're joining us from Mumbai and Dubai to Boston and Buenos Aires, I would make the last panel required viewing. It was a session with all of the career services directors from 4 world-class schools. We had Yale SOM, we had Darden, we had Duke Fuqua, and we had Michigan Ross. It was an extraordinary, an incredibly insightful session. So where do you go from there? Well, of course, having talked about careers, we want to bring in the individuals that themselves have experienced those 4 schools and now gone in similarly transformational directions. When you study art history and you end up working in investment banking, you might have been working in conservation, and then you're going to Impossible Foods. Well, that's the sort of stories that we have in story for the next 45 minutes, and a great pleasure to welcome, let's see, we have Manya Kondamore, an MBA from Yale SOM, who is now a senior program manager of new product introduction at Impossible Foods. Lucy Cantwell is joining us. Lucy is that art historian I mentioned, with her MBA from Michigan Ross. She's now, am I getting my story straight? I think so. She's a VP in investment banking at Citi, so that's quite the transformation. Meg Pride had undergrad in Charlottesville, studying commerce, and is now the founder and CEO of Brandify, a luxury skincare company. And Andrew Daly, also a UVA undergrad, that was popular for today's panel, but went off to Fuqua to get his MBA, having studied international economics, and is now in strategy and consulting at Pfizer. Thank you, all 4 of you, because I'm sure with the positions that you hold, lots of demands on your time, but being able to share those stories can be so valuable for people that were like you, I guess, a few years ago, before you headed to business school. So perhaps, Manya, I've just given a very brief introduction, sort of about your past. Fill us in, and at what point on your journey the idea of heading back and going to business school started to be on your radar?
Yeah, definitely. Happy to share. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Manya Kondamore, currently work as a senior program manager at Impossible Foods, doing new product introduction and commercialization. I graduated from Yale SOM with my MBA 5 years ago now, so it's been some time. My MBA path, I would say, is a little non-traditional, though I know many people always end up saying that because everyone's path is unique. I studied environmental science and engineering in undergrad, and I always intended on working in corporate sustainability. So I actually initially applied to Yale to pursue a master's in environmental management at their environmental school. So I started off only pursuing the master's degree. I wasn't necessarily interested in the MBA because I didn't think it would actually be a good cultural fit for me or a good career fit. But during my time at Yale, at the environmental school, I began engaging more with SOM. I found the students really amazing and incredible peers. I found the classes really compelling, and I realized that the MBA would actually be a value add to me and my career trajectory. It was very different from what I had studied in undergrad. So I found that it would give me more of that business and corporate exposure and credibility that I was really looking for. And that inspired me to apply to the business school while I was already at Yale. So a little bit of a non-traditional path in that it was the only business school that I applied to, it was the only one I considered. But I'm really glad that I did that. And it was a really great experience and set me on the career path that I'm on now, which has shifted more away from corporate sustainability to working more at companies that have that positive environmental mission or impact, like Impossible Foods.
We might touch on later on, Manya, and thanks for such a great start. That the applying to just one school and as a strategy. But let's turn to Lucy. I mentioned fundraising and family foundations, Lucy, after you'd graduated from Vassar, and here you are now at Citibank in investment banking. So a little bit of the backstory that led to Ross and where you are today.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I graduated from Ross with my MBA in 2019. Before business school, I was running a family foundation, as Matt noted. So I was in charge of program management and also the endowment. We had 4 program areas. We were invested across, entirely for impact across our portfolio and across asset classes. And I, had worked in various nonprofits and arts organizations before that. While I was at the foundation, I found the subjective nature of philanthropy specifically, but nonprofits more generally, was something that I was, struggling with over time. It felt like there were a lot of different, part of the reality of a space like that is there's a lot of different ways to measure impact. There's a lot of different definitions of impact. And although that's part of the beauty of the space, it was also difficult to navigate. There's a lot of challenges that come with that. So I was interested in my MBA as a way to develop kind of the hard skills that I hadn't had a chance to develop in my, kind of arts and nonprofit background. I applied to a variety of schools. Michigan ultimately was my top choice because of the ability to, kind of apply what I was learning in the classroom as I was going through the program. I'm obviously happy to speak to that more later. But, when I was looking for that kind of an application, an opportunity to apply the hard skills I was learning in school, investment banking felt like, although at first a surprising path for me, ultimately a really kind of natural one. So I entered the city for my internship, came back full time, and, started as an associate, and now I'm a VP in the consumer and retail team.
It would be fascinating with all of you to sort of be fly on the wall as you had conversations with college counselors about where your career might take you. I mean, Meg, when you sat down with college guidance at UVA for undergrad, the idea of both the industry, but of course the entrepreneur that you have become and now running Brandify. What was your thinking when you were 20, and how did the Darden MBA really impact on that?
Sure. So I did UVA undergrad as well, had the best experience at Darden. And my background coming out of undergrad was in consumer packaged goods. And I learned at these, large companies, they would put the exact same product into two different containers, sell one for $80 and one for $10. And that problem of not knowing, if you should pay up for something or if you can get the same thing for a lower price was what intrigued me about entrepreneurship and made me want to go back to learn more to figure out, okay, like, is this something that's attainable for me in my life? And that's really what Darden did for me.
Right. It's a lot of graduates, I guess, might think of becoming the entrepreneur, but often will then, go into other industries straight out. Were there many of you in your graduating class that came out and set up their own business?
There was a strong and committed crew. And I feel very lucky. Like, we've raised through the Darden network, we've raised $5 million in venture capital to date. We've really grown and developed. There are certainly other companies that are continuing to be on even a similar or better trajectory that came out around a similar time to me. You do kind of have to put on blinders because you see your roommate getting amazing finance offers, and it's definitely not as glamorous, especially early on. But the further you get into it, the more fun it becomes. And I'm very happy with this, path choice.
Great. Well, we sometimes talk about the triple jump of changing geographies and sectors and functions. Andrew, I guess you already had your healthcare consulting experience in DC before joining the Fuqua MBA. Still healthcare, now you're with Pfizer. So was it sort of, I love the industry and just want to open up new opportunities? Tell us about your backstory.
Yeah. So quick backstory on where I was before Fuqua. So yeah, I'm the other UVA grad. Always had a business background. So I'd majored in economics, and a natural transition in going from UVA to the job world was consulting. A lot of folks were heading up to DC, and I took a fairly unique kind of niche consulting approach. So I worked in litigation consulting at a company called FTI Consulting, focused only on healthcare clients, serving them in a distressful situation that they're in. So it was a bit more reactive consulting. What I've always been interested in as I kind of continued through my role in consulting was, how could I also try and hone my skills in more growth in forward-looking strategy, and being able to serve clients more in that vein, maybe looking at innovation, just generally more strategic mindsets that I'm in. And that was something that I'd kind of developed a technical acumen where I was, as well as kind of just the consulting ways of working, being able to manage those types of projects. But wanted to kind of find a way to develop myself from a strategic standpoint. I also wanted to just really be able to dig into healthcare as an industry. I knew that's what I liked, but I felt like I was a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none type situation in consulting, where I would touch on a project for a few months and then I would go on to quite a different project, maybe for a different client. And I kind of knew I was really interested in life sciences, but I wanted to really dig in. So I knew that Fuqua would be able to give me that opportunity and through the health sector management certificate program. And frankly, a lot of the recruiters that they bring in from companies like Eli Lilly and Pfizer and Cigna, there's a lot of healthcare companies that came in. So I knew I'd be in a good position for potentially pivoting in industry when I went to Fuqua. I also was really interested in, again, I think this has been echoed, building my foundational business background. I knew a lot about economics. I didn't know so much about finance, corporate finance, and then that ended up being one of my concentrations of corporate finance. And so I think it came down to wanting to build my healthcare knowledge base and also trying to have a bit more of a strategic mindset. And I knew I was going to get that opportunity in business school through not just the classwork, but also a lot of the experiential learning opportunities and things of that nature, which we'll probably get into later on.
Right. Manya, just mindful from the class of 2018, there's often an understandable focus on the first job coming out of business school and also first impressions. You've completed the program with all of the intensity and emotion and business modeling that's involved. As you now reflect on graduation and 5 years later, are there aspects of the Yale MBA experience that you're perhaps more keenly aware of that may not have been apparent, as you came out of school and say, right, now, 5 years on, it makes great sense?
Yeah, I would say maybe the piece of the MBA that's probably still most relevant to me today, 5 years out, is the network that I built while I was there. So when I initially graduated, I was actually living in Austin, Texas. I think at the time I was the only Yale MBA from my class there. So I felt very isolated and I was alone. But even when moving there, I didn't know anyone when I first moved there. I was able to draw on the broader Yale network as well as the Yale SOM network to really build and form connections while I was living in Austin. And now, a couple of years later, living in the Bay Area, the Yale SOM network is really strong. And it's really kind of helped me stay connected. So I'm now at my third company out of my MBA. And I would say definitely the second role, and I think maybe even this one, that SOM network really helped me get my foot in the door and make the right connections to build that job career trajectory that I have right now. So I would say the MBA network at SOM is small but mighty, and I've really appreciated it ever since graduating. And it's definitely something that's carried me through, and I expect to really be an important part of my post-MBA career long term.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back to the work that you've done with career services, not just for the first position, but now, as you say, 3 different companies that you've worked with. You'd also characterized perhaps being a non-traditional profile, whatever that means today, because everybody's story is indeed distinct. But Lucy, on paper, having worked in fundraising, galleries, and then the family foundation, as you reflected on the MBA, presumably there weren't a lot of people in the network that had all done an MBA. It wasn't like you're at McKinsey or Goldman. So how did you sort of think through everything of the investment that you were looking to make?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question. I'd gotten to a place in my career where I knew I wanted some sort of change, and I candidly really considered a wide range of options. I considered going to school for other degrees. I considered just looking for different jobs. And ultimately, when I was able to articulate to myself that what I was looking for was kind of a more technical and frankly, kind of business perspective that I could, that I wanted to be able to draw on, an MBA ended up making the most sense to me. I think, an MBA is not the only way necessarily that you can develop these skills, right? But for someone like me who had a very different background, was coming from a very different place and had a very different set of previous experiences, being able to really invest the time, attention, and focus into, an opportunity that would allow me to really focus all of my time and attention on developing those skills was, ultimately to me was the most effective use of time and money.
Mm. And Meg, you already knew UVA and the beautiful campus, but suddenly it would be this shift to the case method that Darden is, justifiably renowned for. I have to ask you, tell us about the learning experience and cold calls and how that prepares you when you've done, 320 cases, whether to become a consultant or an entrepreneur or, in fact, anything.
I absolutely loved the case method. Just being in the problem and solving the problem as if you are, the protagonist. And I feel like I use that all the time in my daily life. And I think what I love about the case method so much is nothing's ever, exactly black and white. It is, there's so many gray areas, and that's literally how business is on a day-to-day basis, especially as an entrepreneur. What I pull on a daily basis is knowing what to reference or what tools I should be using. And that's, I think, what the case method and really your MBA in general teaches you. And so I loved it at Darden, and getting cold called is a great way to make sure everybody's actually, learning and engaged. And we do it based on, I'm sure some of the other programs use learning teams as well. So having a incredible learning team that you're able to prep with the night before was really influential in my success.
So let's say in the current, you've got a supply chain issue with Brandify. Is there sort of a Darden mindset, or you talk about still referring to the case method as a way of thinking through a problem? It's something that you apply to the current challenges?
Absolutely. Like I think it's like the newspaper analysis, like, should we order more? That the whole operational analyses that you do. And yeah, that's exactly what day-to-day life is like. I will say I also still rely on my Darden professors. So, when something's going wrong, I can make a 7 a.m. phone call to someone I trust. And that also has been really valuable in terms of building my business.
Hey, being able to call anybody at 7 a.m. speaks volumes about the quality of that relationship, right? And we talk about relationships. I guess at Duke, it's embedded. We talk about Team Fuqua. Was that something that you'd already observed, Andrew, and that we're very drawn to? And what its reality? Team Fuqua on a brochure, but what does it actually mean as you go through the program and then subsequently and as an alum?
Yeah. I got this question many times over my time at Fuqua and beyond. I think what it really comes down to is just the loyal community. And that's one of we have paired principles. There's 5 or 6 of them. And one of them is called loyal community, as well as supportive ambition. And the ability to feel like you're in not an anti-competitive environment. Everyone's very competitive that goes to Duke, but everyone is very collaborative. Everyone's willing to kind of support one another. And I'm sure that's the case at all of these MBA programs, but it's really kind of a top value for Fuqua. I've always felt like I could lean on my fellow peers at any given time, even learning to be very vulnerable with your team. So learning to say, I don't know this, and it's not a competitive environment. Someone else on your team is going to teach you and to help you along. And I think that is also rang true in my experience as an alumnus. I've really been able to lean on folks at Pfizer who worked at Fuqua, even at Duke. People that work here at Pfizer, they'll put in the extra time to speak with me. It's like it's kind of funny. It's like, we're all Team Fuqua. Let's like go and grab coffee tomorrow morning downstairs, even though that person might be very many levels above me. So I feel like I've always felt that sense of community, even though I'm 600 miles away in New York. So it's really strong, and I think you can also see just the nature of the basketball program and sports and the athletics actually kind of brings people together too, and it kind of like creates this even stronger link of Team Fuqua because everyone kind of supports the fandom of Duke to a certain extent. And it's a little silly to say that, but it's But I really feel like I can call on really any of my classmates, even now, for any sort of favor or any sort of support in any way. And I think the supportive ambition, which is the other principle, really speaks to that as well. The ability to kind of rising tide, raises all ships kind of mentality.
Well, I think the the collaborative nature that you describe is true of your 4 schools. I wouldn't then say it's true of all of the schools. Manya, when one of your classmates or peers, she was saying when we might all have been applying for the same position, but we're all rooting for everybody's success. If someone succeeded, we all succeeded. Again, was that very much part of your experience at Yale of how people are helping, with job interviews and of course getting through that tough accounting exam?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I believe Meg alluded to this. We also had kind of that learning team structure. So you had those learning teams to really help you out and support. And it definitely felt like we were all working together, not against each other. And I think a lot of that was driven by, one, just the mindset of the people coming to the school. People coming to SOM were really, really aligned with the values and with the mission of the school. And I think that really speaks to the reason we were all there and encouraged us to help each other out. And then secondly, I think the class size really had a factor in that as well. So we had a pretty small class size, I learned later on, relative to other MBA programs. We were around 330 people. So we really all got to know each other, got to interact with each other. And I think through that, you really feel like you're working together, not that there's this scarcity of jobs and you all need to be cutthroat to find your path forward. And I think it just makes for a much more collaborative and a much more enjoyable experience. You're going to be spending so much time with your classmates. You really want them to be people you feel like would be your friends or people that you feel like are supporting you, not working against you. And I really felt that way at SOM.
So without putting you on the spot, Manya, and he's like, oh God, where's he going to go with this question? Let's imagine this year, suddenly a Goldman Sachs report that says that AI and ChatGPT is going to impact on 300 million jobs. And there you all are in the campus in the morning. What would be the collective response? Not perhaps that morning, but over time in terms of, wow, how do we think this through collectively and how it might impact us?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It is kind of putting me on the spot. If I had to think back to my time at SOM, I would think that the natural reaction, and this is just completely honest, is first it would probably blow up. This is dating us, but blowing up on our Facebook group and in our WhatsApp group of everyone discussing it and trying to figure out what's going on. And I think the immediate next reaction would probably be some sort of leadership, whether it be from the tech club or the student government club or something like that, organizing discussions or panel groups or something like that, one, to get a bunch of different perspectives on it and then determine how this would really impact people's career search or their job search or their path forward. So I think there'd be definitely a focus on how does this impact society at large, but then also practically translating it to how will this impact those of us who want to work in this space. So I think that focus on both the broader society impact, but then making it very tactical was kind of like a hallmark of my time at SOM. And that's probably what the reaction would end up being. And it aligns, I guess I never said this explicitly, the mission of SOM was to educate leaders for business and society. So I think it would probably fall pretty closely in line with that.
Yeah, and that was a discussion in the previous panel about careers with Heather from Michigan Ross. We also talked a lot about agility and adaptability, Lucy, and those characteristics. Now, the investment banking industry, of course, will have many, quant skills, technical skills involved. But how does the school also prepare you for, want of a better word, soft skills? Maybe the interrelational skills of networking and just connecting with people that you think have served you well in your role at Citi in recent years?
Yeah, definitely. So investment banking recruiting is actually a relatively specific process. It's one of the more structured recruiting processes, certainly at Michigan, but now being on the other side, seeing how it works at other schools as well. And the school was absolutely invaluable in helping, to kind of break that down and make it a little bit more accessible to us as we were going through that process. So it starts, all the banks would come on campus. You have an opportunity to meet everybody in person, and you have the finance club kind of really holding your hand through the expectations at every step of that process. So they would, have sessions with us. This is what it's going to be like. This is what the banks are thinking about when they come visit. This is, what a successful kind of day is going to look like when you come and you have both the presentation, but also the networking afterwards. And then for Michigan, at least, this varies school to school, and this was pre-COVID, I traveled to New York every week for about 7-8 weeks to have coffee chats with bankers across the street. And that too, the finance club, helped us understand, what does that mean? How do you set up these meetings? How do you structure your day? How do you think about, what you're trying to communicate when you have those conversations? And also, what do you need to make sure to understand? What's the opportunity for you to both present yourself and learn about each different bank as you go through this? So, that's just it's probably more specific than necessarily than certainly other industries, but it was extremely helpful to have that kind of institutional knowledge that was passed down from MBA 2s to us as incoming MBA 1s. We had the infrastructure of the school and career services kind of underpinning that. And then, of course, you're practicing the soft skills, every day in class between, coordinating with your other students as you go through, prep for different projects, and also just the kind of very nature of the participatory environment of an MBA classroom.
Mm. I don't know, Meg, for an entrepreneur, because of course what Lucy's describing, US News, Bloomberg, the Financial Times, they'll try to capture the ROI of an MBA because of salaries 3 years out or 5 years out. But if you look at some of the more intangible benefits, even as simple as self-confidence, are there things, as you now look at yourself years after the program and say, well, I'm entrepreneur, and the rewards that come with that, do you observe in yourself a level of confidence that perhaps you wouldn't have otherwise had?
Absolutely. I really, think that's through the people that I met and what I learned through the people that I met. And it's interesting because I feel like confidence is something that you have to consistently cultivate. And I feel like having an MBA from Darden is kind of what enabled me to learn how to do that and learn how to make connections. And there is a focus on continuous learning, which I think is so important, relative to your other question, how the world is changing right now. So yeah, confidence. I think the experiences I had there, so a couple things that I absolutely loved about the program is I served for the UVA seed fund. So you essentially get to pick investments as a Darden student. And that was really incredible as an entrepreneur, getting to understand, okay, what are the realities of getting financing or starting new ventures class? It's really like you get to practice a lot of things in your Darden life that you end up utilizing in your post-Darden real life afterwards.
Yeah. So what's the advice, Andrew, when you show up for the first day at Fuqua, and it's like being a kid in a candy store, both in the courses, subsequent electives that you can take, but I mean just countless clubs, treks, activities. I mean, more than you can fit into a day. What would your advice be to anyone, or to yourself, if you go back to that first day of school, of how to prioritize and optimize the experience?
Yeah, when you start your MBA, you're going to get thrown so many things. I mean, not only is recruiting you're going to be pretty quickly off to the races, starting to, freshen up your resume and sort of think about coffee chats with alums and whatnot. I think just thinking about a prioritization framework somewhat, not to get into strategy, but that was something that I did, that I was given as a word of advice from an alumnus. And I think that was really helpful for me. And so I thought about it 3 ways in terms of how to get involved. One is, and this is around clubs, I'll also talk about experiential learning, so I think that's equally important, but joining a club or an activity that's going to enhance your career. So the healthcare club, consulting club, whichever is going to help your actual, opportunity to get a job. You should also try and find a club that's going to allow you to build your leadership and executive reasoning skills. So finding a passionate club that maybe not, necessarily related to your recruiting endeavors, but maybe something that might allow you to build relationships with professors, or maybe it's you being able to lead amongst many of your other very talented peers because it's maybe a club of over 150 people and you're the president. And then the last one is a club or an activity that will spark joy. And that's honestly the most fun one. I was the president of the Fuqua Ski and Snowboarding Club. And I also was a member of the blockchain club to learn a little bit more about Web3 and venture capital within that space. That was really exciting to me. And so I chose those 3 or 4. There were 70 clubs at Fuqua, so you could do honestly anything. So creating that priority at the beginning is really important, and I think that creates a nice roadmap for you and kind of alleviates some of the stress of decision paralysis. The one other thing I'll call out is just also trying to find as early as possible an experiential learning opportunity. So some sort of mentored study, an externship or internship that might engage you closer to the community, as well as closer to maybe startups. Maybe you do want to learn a little bit more about entrepreneurship. I ended up having a conversation with one of our associate deans, and he connected me with a previous alum who had just started a company in Chapel Hill. I ended up becoming his basically head of strategy for 4 months before I went into Pfizer. And I wouldn't have gotten that experience had I not had those conversations with Fuqua leadership. But also, if I had not kind of prioritized mentored studies as something I wanted to do in experiential learning, and I think that has been extremely valuable in my last few years outside of Fuqua. And so I'd recommend just creating a prioritization framework, not being bogged down by all the choices you have, being very intentional about what clubs you want to join and what you'll get out of it, and then also getting that experience outside of the classroom.
As the extension of that, Manya, and of course we have U of M, we've got UVA, we've got Duke University. Does it matter, or is it an advantage when a business school is within that wider university? Because everything Andrew just described for Fuqua and 70 plus clubs is then amplified across an entire wider institution. Did you benefit from other things that were happening at the wider university?
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me, maybe the benefit is the most obvious because I pursued a joint degree at another school on the university's campus at Yale. But I think even if you don't choose to pursue a joint degree, I think one of the big benefits of an MBA program, especially one that's well integrated into its home institution, is that you get access to all those resources and all the connections and everything else that's going on the campus. And I think that Yale did a really great job of that. So while I was in school, I served on the Graduate and Professional School Senate. So that was a student government body that sat across all the graduate schools. It allowed me to meet students, from the med school, from the law school, just connect and create programming for those folks. I also worked at the Asian American Cultural Center at Yale, which allowed me to connect with, again, other graduate students, but also with undergraduates and really get to know more about their experiences. And I really feel like taking advantage of those opportunities is really important because it just broadens your network and your perspective that much more. And it also helps you find different places of community, especially at a large school. So for me, my undergrad, I went to UCLA, which was an amazing school, but also a massive school. And I think going to a smaller school allowed me to engage with other parts of the community and with other people that I might have not otherwise crossed paths with. So I would definitely say if that's something that's important to you, it's something to try and prioritize and ask current students about when you're considering MBA programs.
Right. And Lucy, we've got through 40 minutes of a panel without mentioning football, even when U of M is in the picture. In fact, my final question to you is perhaps a little more philosophical. With viewers that will hear from all 4 of you, inspiring stories. There's a level of, you're incredibly articulate and thoughtful. You're enjoying great success. And they're thinking, my turn next. I'm going to apply to business school. What does Ross want to hear? What should I be saying to the admissions office? When you held up a mirror to yourself and really thought deeply, about who you were, what you wanted from life, what would your advice be for anyone embracing the whole admissions process to get the most out of it? Hopefully great outcomes too, but just really taking this chance in their early career to step back and think about what they really want.
So 2 things come to mind. I think the first is, and let me see if I can do this straight. I think I approached my kind of application process as a series of kind of hypotheses, or maybe a better way to say it is I had kind of an overarching hypothesis that this might be a good fit for me, but I didn't know because it felt like such a huge deviation from anything I'd done before. And I broke, the whole application process down into each constituent step. And, I was like, okay, I'll study for the test. I'll see how that goes. I'll see if I enjoy it. And I'll see if I do well. And I really enjoyed, the kind of change in thought process that studying for the GMAT required. It was a deviation from what I'd been doing before in a way that really validated this idea that I had, that actually maybe this is a really good fit. Maybe, okay, I'll keep going. I'll keep progressing. I'll keep, going through each subsequent step. And so I think maintaining that open mind is a really helpful, kind of perspective as you embark on a long-term and quite complicated and difficult goal, like starting an MBA. And then the other thing I'd say is, and maybe this comes kind of through the course of that hypothesis testing, is really once you're kind of embarking on the actual experience, know why you're doing it. I think the most successful people that I went to school with were people who had very clear goals about what they wanted out of an MBA. They knew exactly. It doesn't mean that you are rigid in, if you don't achieve XYZ goal, everything's for naught, you're a total failure. It's not at all rigid like that, but I think making sure that you understand what you're really focused on getting out of a program will help you better articulate your value proposition to admissions. It'll help be that kind of guiding star as you go through what is, again, a long and arduous process. And it helps with, various folks have talked about the importance of prioritization when you get on campus. And that also helps you, weed through all of the fun and attractive. And, I agree with Andrew, it's certainly really important to make sure you have, you build in space for fun and enjoyment through your MBA, but it also, I think you get more out of the overall experience if you know exactly what you want to leave with. So that's my advice. That's how I thought about it.
So with the sort of intentionality that Lucy's describing, Meg, and as you think about all of the steps, not just the application itself, but looking at schools. I mean, 4 great schools. I think viewers would be thrilled with offers from any of them. What was really instructional or insightful for you as you got to know the school, bearing in mind, of course, that you'd studied at UVA for undergrad? What helped you most? Talking to alums, sitting in on a class? What do you think is most valuable to then ultimately find the right institution for you?
So just, going back to those entrepreneurial roots is you have to show up in person, go meet people in person, go see what the school is like. I remember I was introduced to MJ Toms, who, helps run a lot of the entrepreneurial programs there. She invited me for coffee. Darden does, morning coffee. So the entire school is basically on break at the same time and you're having coffee together. And when I saw this extremely collaborative environment, like that's really what made me feel so connected to that school in particular. And I think that is ultimately like what made my experience so positive there during the time and also since leaving.
Andrew, final question. If you could do it all over again, same choice, same conviction?
Yes. In terms of choosing the MBA path in Duke. Yeah, I think that's a no-brainer for me. I think it's given me the skills that I need to be confident. I think Meg had comments on that about like, it does increase your confidence. You learn a lot from the network you work with. It also just gives you a lot of those foundational skills that really make you much more sure in a lot of kind of different business decisions that you have to make. You have a cursory understanding of finance, of marketing. And that's what the MBA gives you. And I've felt just much more confident in the way in which I conduct myself here versus pre-MBA. I'd also say, just in terms of, Fuqua going down the path of healthcare, the health sector management certificate was incredibly valuable. Some of the experiences that I had in the classroom and out of the classroom, all very healthcare focused, and we worked on a lot of cases that were highly relevant for the work that I'm doing here at Pfizer, which is very interesting. I've actually done one of our professors, Professor Ridley, who is a health economist that works at Fuqua. And I've continued my conversation with him because the work that's coming out of Fuqua is so important that it's actually something that can be relevant to the work we do here at Pfizer. So yeah, I would say I absolutely 100% would do it again. And but I think all of these are obviously fantastic schools, so no one could go wrong at any of these 4 programs.
I guess, as Rennie Zellweger said, you had us at yes. Thank you. Thank you, all 4 of you, because 4 very distinct and different experiences, 4 different personalities and the paths that you've all pursued. I sometimes wonder, that when we talk, so many people talk about the MBA being the best 2 years of your life, and whether it's hype, I don't know the best, but certainly 2 extraordinarily enjoyable, impactful, and you've helped capture that in this webinar for Centre Court. And I think to be able to pass that on to the next generation is of tremendous value. So Lucy and Manya, to Meg and to Andrew, continued success with your ventures, both personal and professional. But thank you very much for joining us at the MBA Festival.